Two global giants are on a collision course. If World War III erupts, the spark may come from the United States and China, already locked in competition over trade, technology, and global power. Both insist they don't want war, yet both build their militaries. With tensions rising in the South China Sea, are we facing a global disaster, or is it a bluff? On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're revealing how the US and China could start World War III. The most dangerous 100 miles of water on Earth lies between mainland China and Taiwan, and every day it gets more crowded with warships playing a deadly game of chicken. Sometimes the game turns violent, but not in the way you might expect. On August 11, 2025, 10 nautical miles off Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea, the Philippine Coast Guard found out firsthand. What looked like another routine clash with Chinese forces suddenly turned into a moment so shocking it rattled defense ministries from Washington to Tokyo. A Chinese-guided missile destroyer and a Coast Guard cutter, both racing to intercept a Philippine vessel, collided at high speed. In a spectacular crash, the destroyer sheared the bow clean off its own country's cutter, leaving the ship heavily damaged and unseaworthy. Debris was scattered across the choppy waters. The Filipino vessel in question was simply delivering fuel and supplies to more than 30 fishing boats. Yet this humanitarian mission somehow triggered a collision between warships worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And in their overzealous attempt to intimidate a much smaller Philippine patrol boat, the Chinese had managed to destroy their own vessels. U.S. Navy ships routinely conduct deliberate freedom of navigation operations through Chinese-claimed waters every month. These patrols are less about direct confrontation and more of an attempt to demonstrate that aggressive maritime behavior has consequences. When great powers start ramming their own ships while chasing fishing boats, it's time for cooler heads to prevail. What's most amazing is that, in context, the incident didn't even really come as a surprise to the international community. The Taiwan Strait, after all, is a cauldron of brinksmanship and competition, and it has been for decades. Chinese fighter jets scream across an invisible line that's supposed to keep the peace. Taiwanese pilots scramble to intercept. Radio frequencies crackle with tense exchanges in Mandarin and English. Chinese warships shadow every American vessel with confrontational intimidation tactics, turning routine patrols into high-stakes interactions. Ships maneuver aggressively in waters barely as wide as Lake Michigan, but with 10 times the military hardware and 1,000 times the political stakes. The numbers tell the story. In May 2024 alone, China deployed 111 aircraft and 46 naval vessels around Taiwan, with 82 Chinese military aircraft crossing the median line (ADIZ), an unofficial boundary that's become the world's most militarized zip code. By August, Taiwan had detected 464 Chinese military aircraft buzzing the island, with at least 300 crossing into what used to be neutral airspace. But it was a seemingly routine February morning in 2024 that showed just how quickly things can go sideways. Chinese Coast Guard vessels spotted a Taiwanese speedboat near Kinmen Island, just fishermen doing what fishermen do. What happened next almost started a war. The Chinese boats gave chase, the Taiwanese speedboat, overloaded and panicking, capsized in rough seas. 2 fishermen drowned. For 48 hours, both sides mobilized additional vessels. Taiwan sent patrol boats. China responded with larger Coast Guard cutters, their crews armed and ready. The world held its breath while diplomats worked frantically behind the scenes. Eventually, both sides found a face-saving way to back down. They barely managed to control a crisis that started with a fishing boat. What happens when it's a destroyer instead? Tensions were further escalated in June 2024. Chinese sailors in tactical gear stormed a Philippine naval vessel, delivering routine supplies to a World War II-era outpost. Armed with knives and axes, they smashed communications equipment and injured a Filipino Marine, severing his thumb. Pentagon officials debated whether this act counted as an armed attack, requiring U.S. retaliation under mutual defense treaties. A clear pattern begins to emerge. Chinese vessels close in, as they always do, at least according to everyone but Beijing. Taiwanese, Filipino, or other regional forces respond. Radio chatter escalates. Ships weave dangerously and aircraft circle overhead. Then it happens. One reckless turn, one radar glitch, one pilot pushing it too far, and suddenly there are casualties that demand retaliation. President Xi Jinping has recently reiterated why China cares so much about Taiwan. According to him, it will be reunified with mainland China, and he is not talking about peaceful negotiations either. Xi has intoned that this reunification is an inevitability. So the question becomes not where or what, but when. U.S. intelligence officials believe Xi has given the People's Liberation Army a deadline to take Taiwan by 2027. Suddenly, what could be chalked up as little more than military theater has turned into operational planning with a countdown timer. China claims 90% of the South China Sea based on historical maps from the 1940s. By that logic, Italy could claim the entire Mediterranean. But China backs its claims with the world's largest Coast Guard fleet. China has built the world's largest navy by hull count, constructing vessels at a pace that would make America's World War II shipyards jealous. Their newest Type 55 destroyers pack 112 vertical launch cells, which is more firepower than most countries' entire navies. They have turned disputed reefs in the South China Sea into unsinkable aircraft carriers, complete with runways and missile batteries. Turn on Chinese state television any given week, and you'll see footage of amphibious assault exercises that look suspiciously like Taiwan's coastline. Amphibious landing vessels that look suspiciously like Churchill's famous Mulberry Harbors that can offload tons of military equipment and vehicles on D-Day. Military parades showcase DF-21D carrier killer missiles specifically designed to sink American aircraft carriers. The message couldn't be clearer. China isn't just talking about reunification anymore, they are training for it. America now finds itself trapped in a promise it made decades ago when the stakes seemed much lower. The Taiwan Relations Act commits the U.S. to provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character. It is a deliberately vague phrase that sounds reasonable in 1979, but it feels like a ticking time bomb today. This policy of strategic ambiguity has created a diplomatic minefield that would be comical if the stakes weren't so deadly. Officially, the United States recognizes the People's Republic of China as the sole government of China and acknowledges, not endorses, Beijing's position that Taiwan is a part of China. At that same time, America treats Taiwan as a sovereign state in everything but name. When Taiwanese officials visit Washington, they can't use the front entrance of government buildings or display their flag. They enter through service doors, yet those same officials coordinate billion-dollar arms deals and share classified intelligence with Pentagon generals. This contradiction reached peak surrealism in 2022, when then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Despite furious Chinese threats, Beijing's response was to fire ballistic missiles over Taiwan and conduct military exercises that effectively blockaded the island for days. And yet, on paper, nothing changed. Washington stuck to its one China policy, even as it signaled it would risk nuclear war to protect an island it doesn't officially call a country. The military reality on the ground tells a different story, one that is not so ambiguous. America has $22 billion in approved arms sales to Taiwan sitting in the pipeline. American military advisors train Taiwanese forces. U.S. warships transit the Strait monthly in what officials call routine operations, but everyone knows they're shows of force. Which raises the impossible question, can America really abandon an ally it spent decades arming and training? Any American president who lets Taiwan fall without a fight would face immediate impeachment calls from both parties. But any president who fights for Taiwan risks nuclear war with China. Congressional hawks have made backing down politically impossible. The Taiwan Relations Act may use diplomatic language, but the politics are stark. Lose Taiwan, lose your presidency. Military analysts have gamed out the most likely scenario for conflict, and it doesn't start with bombs or bullets. It starts with a phone call from a cargo ship captain to his company headquarters. The Chinese Navy is demanding to inspect our cargo. What should I do? Chinese warships could complete a full maritime blockade of Taiwan within 24 hours. Here's how it could play out. A routine People's Liberation Army Navy exercise suddenly expands. Chinese destroyers and frigates begin to intercept all vessels approaching Taiwan. They don't call it an invasion, they call it a quarantine, to prevent military supplies from reaching separatist forces. The world surmises what the real purpose is, debating but not deciding a course of action. The squeeze would be immediate and devastating. Taiwan imports 98% of its energy and 70% of its food. The island's 23 million people would face shortages within days. Gas stations would run dry. Power plants would shut down for lack of fuel. Hospitals would run low on critical supplies. The choice would be simple: surrender or starve. Now imagine the captain of a U.S. Navy destroyer approaching this blockade zone. The Chinese regard these waters as their own, and every maneuver carries risk. The captain faces the most consequential decision since the Cuban Missile Crisis: break through the line and risk firing the first shots of World War III, or turn away and watch America appear to abandon its allies in real time. Deep down, there is no good choice. Retreat undermines U.S. security guarantees. Advance could spark a nuclear war over a shipping lane. Once the shooting starts, domestic politics make backing down nearly impossible, since again, Xi has spent years telling the Chinese people that Taiwan's reunification is inevitable. His legitimacy as leader rests on this promise. Any American president who appears weak on China faces instant political death from opponents who will call them the leader who, quote, lost Taiwan. Modern military operations create their own momentum. China would need to coordinate the most complex amphibious assault in human history, synchronizing air, land, and sea forces with cyber and space warfare. Once those forces are positioned and ready, military commanders are under enormous pressure to use them or risk appearing weak and indecisive. The timing makes everything worse. Modern conflicts move at digital speed. From first shot to full-scale war could be just 72 hours. That's not enough for diplomats to fly between capitals, hold emergency sessions, or negotiate compromises. In 1962, Kennedy and Khrushchev had 13 days to resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis. Today's leaders might have 13 hours, probably less. History offers a chilling parallel. In 1914, European leaders genuinely believed they could fight a limited war after Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination. Mobilization schedules and alliance obligations made that impossible. Today's version runs on fiber optic cables and satellite links. Cyber attacks, missile strikes, and space warfare can all unfold simultaneously and therefore escalate faster than any human decision-maker can control. The alliance domino effect in place offers another echo of the past. An attack on Philippine forces could trigger the same mutual defense clause that dragged America into Afghanistan after 9/11. Japan conducts joint patrols with Philippine vessels and provides radar systems to Manila. Australia's ANZUS treaty obligations means that Canberra faces enormous pressure to honor alliance commitments. What starts as a local scuffle between Chinese and Filipino sailors could easily cascade into a global conflict involving nuclear powers within hours. Let's return to the hypothetical. The captain of a U.S. Navy destroyer has orders that could start World War III. Chinese warships have encircled Taiwan, and the government wants the destroyer to test the blockade and break through. As the ship nears the point of no return, the captain has no idea that answering routine warnings will trigger the most sophisticated and consequential military operation in history. Somewhere outside Beijing, a cyber warfare officer receives a single green light. The naval confrontation about to erupt in the Taiwan Strait is suddenly about far more than ships. Moments later, the destroyer's GPS shows it's miles from its true position. Communications with the Pentagon are down, and radar begins to display phantom vessels while missing real threats. The invisible opening strike of World War III has already begun. China's military doctrine actually calls for exactly this: coordinated strikes across multiple domains: land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. That means that when they fight America in the water, they're simultaneously fighting in cyberspace, outer space, and the financial markets. As the U.S. ships steer toward the most dangerous naval confrontation in recent history, Chinese hackers are executing coordinated attacks on targets no one even thinks about. Back in the United States, most Americans are asleep, completely unaware their country is under attack. Chinese cyber warfare units have spent years, even decades, infiltrating American utility companies, planting digital time bombs in over 55,000 electrical substations. The timing isn't random. As the captain gives the order to pull the trigger on the deck guns, Chinese hackers pull the trigger on America's power grid. Remember when hackers shut down the Colonial Pipeline in 2021? Gas stations ran dry for days, and people waited in mile-long lines just to fill up their cars. Now imagine that same scenario, but across power plants in Texas, water treatment facilities in California, cell phone towers across the Midwest, every one of them going dark simultaneously. America has no choice but to respond. 50 caliber warning shots are fired across the bow of the Chinese frigate. They respond with their own warning bursts. Within 3 minutes, both sides are shooting to kill. As tracer rounds light up the Taiwan Strait like a deadly fireworks show, the cyber attacks go into overdrive. GPS satellites that guide everything from smartphones to Uber drivers to military drones start broadcasting false coordinates. Communication satellites experience mysterious malfunctions that aren't mysterious at all, since they're being jammed by Chinese space warfare units. It's a 21st century war with 21st century weapons. Only America is blind and deaf. Billion-dollar destroyers packed with the most advanced technology on Earth are reduced to fighting by sight alone. When Americans on the eastern seaboard wake up, they reach for their phones to check the news from Taiwan, but nothing loads. The internet is down. In an instant, millions realize the battlefield has crossed the Pacific. For many, the thought of a paralyzed digital world is even more terrifying than facing China in open war. Think about how much of your daily life depends on technology. Your morning coffee bought with a credit card. Your commute is guided and shaped by the convenience of GPS. Your paycheck is deposited electronically every 2 weeks. Your text messages to friends and family. In the span of one morning, all of it stops working because 2 naval captains started shooting at each other half a world away. Wall Street tries to open for trading, but the financial system is under full assault. Bank accounts are being drained by artificial intelligence programs. Credit card networks are crashing. Trading algorithms are being corrupted to trigger massive sell-offs. The Dow Jones Industrial Average drops 3,000 points in the first hour. Every international bank transfer, we're talking trillions of dollars every day, flows through something called the SWIFT messaging system. Chinese intelligence has spent decades mapping those networks. When the shooting starts in the Taiwan Strait, they'll flip a switch and trillion-dollar transactions between American and allied banks simply stop. Within 72 hours of those first shots in the Taiwan Strait, every major country on Earth has to choose a side in a war that nobody wanted. How? Japan realizes Chinese missiles can hit their major base in Okinawa within 10 minutes. They face an impossible choice: let American forces launch counterstrikes from Japanese soil, which makes Japan a legitimate military target, or kick their closest ally out and face China alone. Australia invokes the ANZUS Treaty for only the second time since 9/11. The Australian Prime Minister has to decide in hours what would normally take weeks of parliamentary debate: risk Chinese nuclear submarines off the Gold Coast or abandon the alliance that's protected Australia for 70 years. Within 48 hours, the USS Ronald Reagan, a floating city worth $4.5 billion, carrying 6,000 people, steams toward the Taiwan Strait. It's sailing into the crosshairs of Chinese carrier-killer missiles, specifically designed to sink American aircraft carriers. These ballistic missiles can come screaming down from space at hypersonic speeds, carrying warheads that can punch through aircraft carrier armor. By hour 72, Chinese submarines outnumber American vessels 3-1 in Pacific waters. But the war, already expanding, is about to go global. The logical thing for the world's leading economies to do would be to shut China off from the SWIFT banking system, much like Russia was after invading Ukraine in 2022. One problem: China processes $19 trillion annually through SWIFT, 5 times Russia's volume. Cutting China from global financial systems wouldn't just hurt China, it would trigger a global depression that would make 2008 look like a minor hiccup. China controls 80% of rare earth mineral processing, the elements that make your smartphone, your electric car battery, and American military equipment work. A Chinese embargo would cripple American defense production within months. Meanwhile, China builds 40% of the world's commercial ships. If Chinese-controlled vessels simply stopped sailing to American ports, store shelves would be empty within weeks. Things are already looking bad, even before you consider the conflict's nuclear dimensions. China has about 410 nuclear warheads. America has over 5,200. That sounds like America wins, right? Wrong. In nuclear warfare, having more weapons doesn't matter if your opponent only needs a few hits to cripple your economy. One nuclear weapon hitting Shanghai or New York would trigger a global recession. What's really dangerous is when both sides think that they can contain nuclear escalation. China believes it can use limited force for limited goals. America believes it can always escalate higher than China's willing to go. When both sides believe that they can control nuclear war, you get nuclear war. In practice, this looks just like you might think. Chinese submarines sink a U.S. aircraft carrier, killing 6,000 sailors. America retaliates by sinking Chinese naval vessels. China authorizes a single nuclear strike against a U.S. base in Guam, far from American cities, but sending a clear message. America responds with a demonstration nuclear strike against a Chinese facility. Both sides think they're being restrained, that the other side will back down. That's how nuclear weapons get used, through reasonable decisions that each side believes will end the crisis. There is no way to win a war between nuclear superpowers. Unlike World War II, you can't occupy China or America. You can't force unconditional surrender when both sides have enough nuclear weapons to end civilization. The choice is still ours to make. But according to the Atlantic Council's latest survey of over 350 global strategists and security experts, that window may be closing faster than we think. 40% of these experts expect a world war within the next decade, one that could go nuclear and extend to space. Even more alarming, 65% believe China will try to retake Taiwan by force within the next 10 years, up from just 50% who believed this a year earlier. Nearly half of respondents expect nuclear weapons to be used somewhere in the world by 2035. These aren't random guesses from internet commentators. These are the people whose job it is to understand global security threats, and they're telling us the unthinkable is becoming probable. The war would likely end through mutual exhaustion, with both countries economically devastated, politically unstable, and militarily weakened. But the damage to the global system would be permanent. The economic collapse, the breakdown of international trade, the refugee flows from failed states, the environmental damage from cyber attacks on infrastructure alone would affect every person on the Earth for decades. World War III could begin with a single spark, a collision between ships, a cyber attack gone wrong, an automated system making the wrong decision, a decision that spirals too fast for anyone to control. The most terrifying thing about a US-China conflict is that once it starts, no one on Earth could escape its consequences. In the end, the question isn't whether anyone could win such a war, but whether humanity could survive it. If China does make the move on Taiwan, the world will be on edge. Watch, could Taiwan hold off a Chinese invasion, to see if the island could resist the full force of Beijing's military? Or click on this video instead.